A very happy new year to all of our viewers. 2025 is here, a crucial and interesting year for Trinidad and Tobago. A general election is on the horizon. But more than that, citizens want to see where crime is headed in this country, where the economy is headed in this country. Both crucial factors, according to Mariano Browne, former minister in the Ministry of Finance, when it comes to this general election and the potential results. In this interview, our first interview for the year, we also look at the global impact on Trinidad and Tobago. In a matter of days, US President-elect Donald Trump will assume office, and there could be implications for this country as well. My guest this evening is former minister in the Ministry of Finance, Mariano Browne. Mariano Browne, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Happy New Year to you.
And to you as well.
Thank you very much. It's going to be an interesting new year, Mr. Browne. Politically, election-wise, societal-wise, financially. Which one is the most important and which one is the most interesting to you?
I think they're all connected. But my area of interest and my area of specialty is to speak on the economy. So I think that's the one that I would focus on. But they are all connected. Certainly the election is going to determine who is going to set the policies and what direction we will take from a political perspective, and certainly from the point of view of its, how shall we call it, the feedback loop process between the communication between the public and the political actors. I think that's also going to be important.
Your pet is the economy. You are absolutely right. But on the tip of everyone's tongue is the election in 2025. This is going to be a critical one. It's the midway point of this decade. We've had 10 years of the PNM administration, 5 years before that of the People's Partnership. And those memories of the People's Partnership still pretty much live in the memories of a lot of people in this country. Is it set up to be a showdown in this election? How close could it be?
Well, every election is a showdown.
No, but this one is interesting. This one is super interesting in that you have Kamla Persad-Bissessar, still very much a political leader of the UNC. You've got 10 years of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley.
Well, I think both of them are known quantities at this occasion. So I don't think there's going to be any surprises. I think the difference in terms of the political environment is Tobago. And the fact that PNM were literally swept off their feet. So they are minority position in the THA. And the question would be whether the sentiment to Tobago is sufficiently robust to see the PNM losing the 2 seats. Now that's an important part of the political calculation for what moves forward, because the balance is pretty clear in the case of Trinidad. You have 2019 roughly with 22. So changes, and there are some marginal constituencies where things could change. Moruga Tableland is in the UNC's hands, but that's a seat that swings. St. Joseph has traditionally been a swing seat. Whenever there's been a sort of split in the voting, PNM has done well. There was a time it used to do well and then lost St. Joseph altogether. So that you will consider to be a swing seat. Tunapuna could be a dicey seat. You have San Fernando West, right, so that's at least 4, and you have an intriguing prospect in terms that you have a native son of San Fernando who has made his name in education and certainly will resonate with the people in that particular area. So you can say that is a seat that also is one to look at. So
I'll come back to Tobago in a minute, because on the topic of the seats that you're talking about, the EBC has proposed several renaming and changes of boundaries. Do you think that will have any particular consequence in this election? The UNC believes that that there could be some concerns for them.
Well, I think the concerns for both sides. I don't think that it's easy one way or the other. The presumption of the opposition is always that the EBC is in control, always being controlled by the governing party. When the PNM is in opposition, they say the same things. So I can say that reasonably guarantees that the EBC is apolitical in that sense and reasonably professional if both sides are attacking it. So I would say we don't know. It depends upon which polling districts are moved. That could tilt the balance one way or the other. And the idea has always been that you would get approximately 25 to 27,000 people in any one constituency. And there are demographic shifts which take place. So they have to make adjustments to allow for it.
Tobago. Is Tobago going to be the key card in this battle for both political parties?
Well, it's not a card for the UNC. I don't think that the UNC stands a chance of making any inroads in Tobago. So their best chance in terms of getting 21 seats would be in Trinidad, which means that they have to push the PNM in those marginal seats.
What about a political marriage with the TTP? Isn't that going to be something to consider?
Well, I don't think political marriages with the UNC have worked very well. And I think Mr. Farley will pay attention to that. I don't think that he's going to get exactly what he wants. So maybe his best bet is independence. If he can win one or the two seats, that gives him a voice. Now, is he going to run? Is he a factor in the parliamentary positioning? I doubt it. He's pretty certain of his position at the THA. Why would he give it up? And if he gives it up, and he's just simply one of 41, he would have to have a pretty strong position to basically change the leverage inside Parliament. And I don't see that. Now, perhaps I'm short-sighted, but I don't see him giving up his seat. So there are other issues which he has to look at from a political perspective.
Let's talk about some other political issues that will influence this general election that is upcoming. The number one, you might agree with me, would be crime.
Crime and economy are the two top ones, I would think.
Which one would you place on top?
Well, crime affects everyone. The economy affects everyone. Both are important. I can't see the distinction between them at this stage.
Okay. What do you think? How much of an impact would 600 plus murders for 2024 have on the PNM's chances of regaining power next year?
I think it's a significant issue. I don't think the PNM has distinguished itself on the crime front in terms of its ability to manage or alternatively influence the various organs that are part of what we would consider to be crime fighting. It hasn't happened. There's been no demonstrable success. Quite the opposite. We've had the position at the beginning of this year, the Commissioner of Police, for example, was saying that the targets were a bit over-ambitious. Well, as a crime fighter, as a police person, as a management person, one has to be realistic. So if you aren't being realistic in terms of your objectives, how realistic are you in terms of your ability to manage the 7,000 odd members who make up the police service? And are we managing that properly? You have the couple issues in terms of this year. They have at least 3 or 4 cases which have involved police officers which have been withdrawn from prosecution, either from failure, and it's a part of the police prosecutors. So there are a couple of issues there that I would think undermine public confidence in general. There's the issue of the wearing of body cams, which they seem not to want to wear. Well, it's a rule and something has to be done. And we are talking about disciplined uniformed services. So it's either they're up to it or they're not. And if the level of discipline is such that we can't get them to follow basic procedure, then we have to ask some other questions in terms of exactly how well are they doing their job.
One of the other questions that the nation wants answers to would be, will the Prime Minister's decision to keep Fitzgerald Hinds as Minister of National Security for as long as he has been in that position work against him this year?
Well, he's kind of sorted that option out by making Mr. Hinds irrelevant.
He's no longer going to be part of the process for this general election.
And that's one. And the second part, he's appointed Keith Scotland as minister in the ministry. But Keith Scotland seems to be the one who's responsible for the relationship with the TTPS. So if you look at it from that perspective, in a sense, the minister has been weakened significantly. So I doubt, and he's gone silent. Right? So that says that his political positioning is very, very weakened at this stage of the game. And the one who basically is making these statements is Mr. Scotland. So you'll have to say that in large measure, Mr. Hinds has become irrelevant.
Coming up, is this bet on 2027, could it backfire as soon as 2025? You think, you're the expert in this. The president has ordered TTDF officers to accompany TTPS officers on the streets of the country up until March, roughly around just after the carnival period. If the country is to see some level of success in combating crime, lowering the numbers, do you think that, some people say that we Trinis have a 9-day memory. Do you think some reasonable success in the first few months of this year, crime-wise, could,
push it over
the line for the PNM?
Push it over the line. Well, that's a one-horse race. I think the PNM is fighting on many fronts. And I think the best front for them at the moment, quite frankly, is the strength of the UNC. Right? UNC is divided at this stage, and there's no inspirational leadership and there's no inspirational outlook in terms of what is going to take place. PNM has the same problem, right, in terms of setting out what their blueprint is, how they're going to handle matters, what are going to be the key issues, and more importantly, what are the key measures and solutions that are meant to carry them there. Effectively, what we've had so far is a promise, right, that we have to basically hold strain in 25, 26 until we get to 2027. I don't know that that's strong enough. I think we have to do a lot more, because quite frankly, we don't know what's going to take place in 2027.
We don't even know what's going to take place in 2025. President Donald Trump, President-elect, will take charge on January 20th. Do you see, let's talk about the economy.
Precisely.
Let's talk about the economy.
Precisely.
Is this bet on 2027, could it backfire as soon as 2025? You think, you're the expert in this.
Well, I'm not the expert. I mean, that will give me a crystal ball so I'll be able to see the future. I can't.
But how concerning are you, Mr. Browne, as an economist and someone who has worked in the Ministry of Finance?
Well, Lauren Manatee is on the road, is going to come. I think the real issue is whether Lauren Manatee is going to have the effect that they expected to. Quite frankly, the real issue moving forward, and this has been an issue for quite some time, is cross-border gas, not across-the-border gas. Right? Cosina and Lauren Manatee are what you call cross-border gas, meaning that we share the field on either side, so we can come to some agreement. But essentially what we're extracting belongs to us, even though we have an agreement with Venezuela. So there's nothing the U.S. can do with regard to that particular arrangement. However, in terms of across-the-border gas, which is more important, because you have to remember where we are. We are operating at approximately 2.5 billion cubic feet a day. And we have installed plant capacity for 4 billion cubic feet a day. So we're about 40% off the mark. Right? That 40% is significant. It means that some plants have to remain closed and others are operating at less than full capacity. Less than full capacity means more refits, means higher operating expenditure. Right? And those, that's basically is affecting the, how shall we call it, the profitability of those firms. And in a market that is competitive, prices have fallen. Natural gas prices have started to rise a bit. But overall, and that the petrol market more or less determines the sort of key benchmark prices for all the other petrochemical prices that will take place. Methanol, ammonia, urea, those type of things. So we're in a situation that is difficult. We have no guarantee with regard to what the price outlook is going to look like. So what's important is, first of all, keeping the plants running, and keeping the plants running as a full enough capacity. You can't do that unless you have access to more gas. Lauren Manatee is not going to change the equation in that regard. We have to look at the impact of Juniper and whatever else came on with Juniper at the time. There are two fields that came on, Angeline. The two fields that came on at the same time. And it raised the total capacity from 3.3 billion cubic feet at the time to 3.6 and a bit. And it kept it going for about 3 years. And then prices fell and the whole industry started to close down.
Well, that's what I kind of wanted to touch on, because how disappointing or satisfied would the Prime Minister be with both his Minister of Finance and the economy after 10 years of ruling, as being the ruling party?
Well,
I mean, there was some, and I want to quantify my question by saying that oil prices did dip. There was the pandemic, which caused, negative...
A rebound.
Yeah, exactly.
But it caused a rebound as well.
Right, a windfall, yeah.
Yeah, it caused a rebound and a windfall which only lasted for, well, just about 2 years, a year and a half.
And then we had the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which also led to a few months.
Also, yes. Yeah. So we had one surplus in between that period of time. But we really have been in deficit financing. We've been in deficit financing for 16 years. Right? At some stage of the game, it's going to hit you. you can only finance deficits to the extent to which you have the ability to repay the loans. A deficit means that you have to borrow money to continue to maintain your expenditure profile.
Essentially, you're spending more than you're
Correct.
earning, right?
All right. Now, in those circumstances, the Minister of Finance has two alternatives: to keep spending in the way that he has, because it maintains your political face, or alternatively, to cut expenditure, and you have to go for austerity. Nobody likes austerity, and austerity hurts everyone. And in those circumstances, what he's opted for is to sort of maintain the status quo. And that has come at the cost of significant deficits. Now, I don't think there's too much he could do about it. He's a difficult hand to play. Right now, so the only thing that comes after that is really how you engage the population, how you, how shall we get them to share in terms of burden sharing. How do you get them to understand that these are the changes will have to take place? And now, critical examples for that would be, for example, the price of your gas at the pump, which means you're reducing subsidy. The second part of that would be the issue of your electricity prices.
Which is oncoming, hasn't come as yet.
Well, it has to come, right, because TNTEC just can't afford it. Right? And if you want
but
to
that in itself, as you brought it up electricity, I mean, is that being a political football? It has to come. Everybody agrees that it should have come many years ago.
Yes.
Is this being kicked, the can being
Yes.
kicked down the road till after
Yes.
election?
Yes, we have several cans that have been kicked down the road. That's one of them. And it's been and the reason for that is very simply, is it politically palatable to add to the austerity measures? Now, the reality is that government is in a difficult place. If we have had an inflationary spiral, and we have had it, the inflationary spiral works and affects everyone, including governments. Most people who talk about it from the point of view of relief to what you would call the man in the street, the public. But government, to maintain its position in terms of expenditure, inflation is also undermining its capacity to do so. Because it means in real terms that government, if it spends the same amount of money, it can buy less, and therefore it can do less. So most people get infatuated with the number of billions, the size of the billions. That's not what's important. What's important is purchasing power. What can you do with it? And the critical issue there is priorities. What do I prioritize? Now, I don't mean to put this on the line, but it's a sensitive point. For example, the fire that took place led to a revelation by the Fire Services Association that they've been underfunded, despite the Minister of National Security saying that they'd met all of their demands. And they point to the fact that they have no fire appliances in at least 6 stations. Right? In the case of Miaro, for example, they share a fire appliance between Miaro and Rio Claro. Now, if you know anything about the geography of that, that's unsustainable.
It's a big, big area.
That's unsustainable.
Yeah.
That can't work. So you have to come to the conclusion that they're underfunded. Now, that's an issue with regard to priorities. Where are your priorities in that regard? And if you spend money in this area, it means I'm not spending it in that one. So you have to justify it, you have to get by, and you have to do a number of issues. And even if you do it for a time, and you shift your priorities from time to time, you have to spend some more time on it. Now, that's unfortunately, I think, is where perhaps the Minister of Finance may be found wanting. The shifting of priorities hadn't occurred and he hasn't enjoyed or hasn't done what you would consider, make certain that we at least fix this portion, not at least put a little piece here or a little piece here. It doesn't work that way. Right? Because at some stage of the game, somebody's going to be left out. You have to determine politically, what am I prepared to undertake? How much political licks am I prepared to undertake?
The finance minister took a lot of licks and still takes a lot of licks for the 4% proposal that he has given to many unions, but on the backdrop of cabinet agreeing to take the salary hike for parliamentarians. How much of a factor will that be for Trinbagonians when they go to cast their vote? Will they remember that?
Of course, of course. They're going to remember it. They're going to remember it very well, right? Because we talked about burden sharing, and that does not satisfy the definition of burden sharing. Right, the public service...
Especially when the Prime Minister just a few days before had said, called on the country to tighten their belts.
Yeah. Well, it's not going to work. All right, and they're not going to... People are not forgiving in those circumstances, because here you are talking about how we share things, and here we are when we get the rubber hits the road, we are not on the same wavelength. Now, part of this is also related to cost of government, and I think that's something that we really haven't addressed. As time goes by and as society becomes more sophisticated, its demands and its expectations rise. And the cost of government rises with it. Now, you can't have a low taxation element and high expectations in terms of government expenditure. At some stage, it has to be financed. And our business model has been built upon taxing the energy sector and using energy sector rents to be able to pay for the rest. Now, given where we are at this stage in terms of the life cycle of the hydrocarbon resources, that model is not sustainable, in which case the man in the street, the public, has to pay more for the services that they're receiving. That means paying more for electricity, that's paying more for water, it's paying more for everything.
Fuel.
Right, everything. Now, the reality of that is that, quite frankly, and Ministry does not aware of that, they only know the prices that they have to live. They're adjusting their expenditure profile on the basis of what they have to face. But the reality is that our energy prices are approximately 1/5 of the energy prices that are elsewhere in the Caribbean region. Now, you could argue, because we've had the benefit of the, not so much the oil subsidy, because we have a hydrocarbon economy, except that the hydrocarbon economy is now trending downwards.
Yeah.
So the ability of the hydrocarbon economy to throw off the kind of cash to be able to afford that is no longer possible. And the only way that you could deal with that is that effectively we have to cost cut at the individual level. Now, that's a conversation that we've not had, and that's a conversation about burden sharing that goes deeper than 4% versus 43% or 37% or whatever percent you want. Right? And in case the real political perspective, and this is where the rubber will hit the road, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet does not have to agree to all of the recommendations. He could agree to some of the recommendations. Which ones? The recommendations that give the Judicial and Legal Service Commission higher salaries.
But not parliamentarians.
But not parliamentarians.
Yeah.
That's a strategy that is really in front of him. That will dissolve the animus. If you don't do it, well, that's an election consideration.
Up next, going into this election, when you look at the political landscape of this country, is it conducive to meaningful change in this country? Or is it just much of the same, much of an exchange? I do want to ask you on the back of that statement that you just made. 10 years later, we talk about the economy. Are you satisfied that enough effort has been placed in diversifying the economy away from these mature gas fields, oil and gas fields that you yourself was just speaking about?
Well, the answer to that would be no. We've not done enough. Now, that's partly a function of government, and that's partly a function of the private sector. And there are two things with regard to that. At the end of the day, whatever the government, the private sector does is also a function of government. Why? Because literally almost everything requires government permissions.
Enabling environment, they call it.
Enabling environment,
Yeah.
Correct. And that enabling environment requires us to have done a lot more with regard to digitalization in the first instance, and in the second instance, in the sense of making business easier, right? And in some of the examples, we can see that government really hasn't spent enough time or enough ideation in terms of how to get done. The cross-registry system is an example. Right, that has taken, oh gosh, I can't tell you how many delays, how much postponements, how many deadlines have been missed. But this has also been a question of weak policy. It's also been a question of poor customer service. It's also been a question that the rules have not been very clear at any level, and that the staff at the registry has not been trained. You go to the registry one day, you get one set of instructions, you go back the next day to meet somebody different, you get a different set of instructions. It has been painful. And that's a reasonably simple system to put into position. Now, that works its way across the system. There are many other things along those lines, where permissions are late, delayed, haven't happened, are too costly. And people talk about delays at the port all the time as an example. That has not improved.
Forex.
How
much will that play on the minds of people in this election year as well? It's been headline news in this country for a few years running.
Here's the issue. Forex is a function of your trade position. If your trade position depends upon the export of natural gas, and either one, your supply has been dwindling, or two, they've been changing the price, then your terms of trade have been changing, which means that your exports are not earning as much as they earned before. And that's pretty straightforward. And in those circumstances, it means you're not going to have as much foreign exchange. The only way that you could solve that, not by administrative measures, it is by dealing with it at the level of the price. And that does not require devaluation. The concept of devaluation, as espoused by the Minister of Finance and by the Prime Minister, is really a red herring, right? Your currency depreciates and or appreciates every day because it's tied to another currency. And whatever happens with that currency, in the case of the US dollar, it appreciates or depreciates. Now that's happening every day. Right?
Everywhere,
everywhere, all over the countries, all along the countries. Now when you postpone, those are trade-weighted adjustments, or the adjustments that come as a result of your changing trade circumstances. What you're doing is building up a backlog. The price at which you're trading officially becomes wider from the real price, what we call the real rate of exchange. And it becomes harder to maintain that price. And you create a black market. The black market itself starts to run away from the nominal price. And you've created a dysfunctionality. Why will I sell money into the system if I can trade and get a higher price on the outside? The difference is about 10, 15 to 20%. In which case, I can make more money by not giving it to the bank. And that's what happens.
So, the Trinidad and Tobago voter, Mr. Browne, has found themselves in a position where they have to vote for,
hurry.
Yeah, right. Not neglecting the smaller political parties, obviously, but the two major political parties led by Kamala Persad-Bissessar and Dr. Keith Rowley. Going into this election, when you look at the political landscape of this country, is it conducive to meaningful change in this country, or is it just much of the same, much of an exchange?
Well, it's been a long time that we've had to address key issues. And right now we're not addressing them. The foreign exchange variable is one of the key ones. And we've attempted to postpone it. As long as you postpone it, the rate of adjustment increases. It's like a patient, a sick patient. They prescribe a course of drugs for you, and you decide not to take it. Well, what happens to the ailment? It gets bigger. So the next time you go back to the doctor, the dosage has to get stronger. And the longer you postpone the adjustment process, the harder the adjustment process, the more difficult it comes, the more medicine that you've had to take. So either one, you do it with some degree of graduality or gradualness, right, so that people can become accustomed to it, they can make an investment decision themselves, or you postpone it. The difficulty with postponement is the day that you have to address it, and you will have to address it, not unless something fortuitous as another war happens. By the way, the war is still going on, correct? In Ukraine. We have more wars in the Middle East, correct?
Yeah.
What is happening to the price of oil and natural gas
I get
again?
where you're going with this.
Right.
I get where you're going. The windfall is ended.
Not only is ended, prices are declining.
Yeah.
So in other words, it really doesn't matter the nature of the geopolitical situation anymore, right? You're not going to get more price. You're not going to get a better price. And if that is so, then your ability to earn more foreign exchange is also declining. So you have to put the emphasis in terms of the other things. And you have to help the business sector get to that point. Right? I mean, probably the best thing that the government could do in that regard is to put 10 businessmen, in the top 10 businessmen in the room and ask them what help you need. Because that's where the change has to take place. And you have to filter that downwards. And that's, I think, is where we've missed the boat. We don't see them as partners. We see the business sector as enemies, or alternatively enemies to attack conveniently. At election time, we need their help, right, for financing, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same token, when it really matters during the course of the year, we are actually looking for an enemy and say they are the problem. And I think that isn't helpful. It really isn't. It's not carrying us anywhere.
Mariano Browne?
Both political parties have to address that.
It is the start of a long, crucial, and interesting year in Trinidad and Tobago politics, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you and welcoming you back on this program. In the meantime, Happy New Year to you and your family.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Was good enough for you?
Well, I thought I was always good enough for you.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. I think I got through most of the three critical topics that I wanted to go through, which would have been politics, the economy.